For 32 years, my brother drove about 90 miles every second Tuesday of each month to a town he always said he disliked. He told me he was going to visit an old army friend who needed help with small things. I believed him because that is what you do when your younger brother looks you in the eye and asks you to trust him. When he died of a heart attack in his sleep at the age of 68, I went there myself to tell that friend in person. But there was no friend. There was something else waiting in that town, locked inside a steel box under a name I had never heard before. And what I found inside that box did not just hurt me. It changed everything I thought I knew about the last 30 years of my life. Before I tell you how a quiet man with arthritis and a damaged hip brought a whole family of greedy people to their knees, do me a favor and press the subscribe button. And tell me in the comments if you have ever buried someone and later realized you never really knew them at all. My name is August Pemberton. I am 71 years old. I worked for 43 years as a freight dispatcher for Norfolk Southern Railway in Roanoke, Virginia. I raised 2 children with my late wife Doreen, who died 12 years ago from ovarian cancer. My brother Silas was the only family I had left in this world, or so I thought. The day we buried Silas was the hottest August day I can remember, the kind of heat that sticks your shirt to your back before you even step off the porch. The cemetery was on a low hill outside Lynchburg, and the grass had turned yellow from weeks without rain. I stood there in my only black suit, the same one I wore for Doreen, and watched my niece and nephew check their phones while the pastor read from Corinthians. My niece is Hadwin. She is 44, very sharp, works at an accounting firm in Charlotte. My nephew is Roscoe. He is 41, a real estate broker, and he is married to a woman named Yelena, who I have never once seen smile without like she was calculating something behind it. They were the only close family Silas had left. He never married, never had children. He worked 30 years as a long-haul truck driver for a paper company, then retired early at 58, and lived alone in a small brick house on the edge of town with a bird feeder he filled every Sunday morning. I stayed at the graveside after the prayer ended. I waited for Hadwin to come hug me. I waited for Roscoe to put a hand on my shoulder and say something like, I was now the last of the Pemberton line. I waited like an old man who had earned at least that much respect. Instead, Yelena walked over. Not even my niece, my nephew's wife. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, Uncle August, we need to talk about the cabin before everyone leaves. She said it like I was some customer she had to deal with. The cabin she meant was my brother's place. A small fishing cabin on Smith Mountain Lake that my father built in 1962. Silas inherited it because I already had a house in Roanoke. Our father wanted each of us to have something. Silas had let me use that cabin anytime I wanted for over 30 years. I told her this was not the time. I told her my brother was still not even in the ground properly, and we could talk later at the gathering. She gave a tight smile, like something practiced. Then she said, August, with respect, you don't understand. Silas didn't leave a will. That means everything goes to next of kin, which is Roscoe and Hadwin. The cabin is already being appraised. We just wanted to inform you. Inform me. That was the word, like they were doing me a favor by telling me the place my father built, and where my whole life had memories, was being taken away before the dirt even settled on his grave. I looked at Roscoe. He was staring at his expensive shoes. I looked at Hadwin. She was already walking away like the talk was finished. Something changed inside me then. Not pain exactly, something colder, like a door closing forever. I drove home alone that day. I skipped the reception. I could not sit there and watch people eat small sandwiches over my brother's death. At home, I poured myself a bourbon and sat at the kitchen table with the ceiling fan ticking above me. I tried to remember my last real conversation with Silas. It was 3 weeks before he died. He called me on a Sunday like always. We talked about normal things for about 40 minutes. Baseball, his knee pain, a hawk he saw near his feeder. Then at the very end, he said something strange. He said, Augie, if anything happens to me, the box is at Tidewater Trust in a town called Marlow Springs. You will recognize the name. Then he laughed and said he was just being silly. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now those words came back heavy. The box at Tidewater Trust, Marlow Springs. I had never been there, but I knew it was the place Silas drove to every second Tuesday for 32 years. He always said he was visiting an army buddy named Henry Coltrane, who had been injured and needed help. He spoke about Henry so much that I felt like I knew him. Henry's wife Lorraine, Henry's dog Diesel, Henry taking coffee black with 2 sugars. It all felt real, or maybe it was never real at all. That night, I called information the old way because I don't trust online searches. There was no Henry Coltrane in Marlow Springs. Not in the town. Not in the whole area code. I sat with that truth for a long time. Then I went to bed and did not sleep. The next morning I called Tidewater Trust. I asked if my brother Silas Pemberton had a safe deposit box there. The woman on the phone went silent for a moment, then told me to come in person, and she asked if I could come before noon. I told her I was 3 hours away. She said she would wait. I reached Marlow Springs just before 12. It was a small town with one main street, a Civil War monument in a traffic circle, and a coffee shop called the Daily Grind with a hand-painted sign. The kind of town that never changed in decades. Tidewater Trust was in an old building that used to be a hardware store. The brick was faded. The windows were old. The woman at the counter looked up as soon as I entered. Her name tag said Beatrice. She looked like she had seen every kind of human emotion in that job. She checked my ID carefully, then looked at me longer than necessary. Something passed across her face. Recognition, or maybe sadness. She told me to follow her. We went past offices and into a secured room full of old metal boxes. She left and came back with a man. He was tall, a bit bent, wearing a suit that looked like it had been worn for years. He introduced himself as Curtis Mallon, branch manager. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. Then he said, "Mr. Pemberton, your brother was my closest friend. I am very sorry." I had to sit down. He had never met me before, but he knew everything about me, my job, my late wife, my children, everything, because Silas had talked about me for 32 years. Curtis brought out a brass key. He opened box 218. He placed the steel box on the table and stepped back. "Take your time," he said quietly. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were manila envelopes, all labeled in Silas's handwriting. The first one said, "For August 1st. I opened it. Inside was a letter written on yellow paper. It started, "Augie, if you are reading this, I am gone. I am sorry I never told you the truth." He wrote that Henry Coltrane was not real. He had made him up. The real story began in 1991 when Silas met a waitress named Cordelia Vance at a roadside diner. She was 28, divorced, with a small daughter named Junebug. Silas wrote that she was the kind of woman who made you believe in God just by serving coffee. They never lived together, they never married, but they stayed connected for 18 years until she died suddenly from an aneurysm at 46. She had been badly hurt in her first marriage and could not live with another man again, so Silas respected that. He bought a house near hers in Marlow Springs in 1993 and visited her every second Tuesday, just like his trips. He also helped raise Junebug, paid for school, nursing college, wedding, all quietly. Then I read something that shook me deeper. Silas had not been poor. He had invested his inheritance of $40,000 in 1983 with a young advisor named Curtis Mallon. That money had grown for decades. Quietly, powerfully, I had to stand up and walk around the room. My mind could not hold it still. When I came back, I picked up the next envelope. "The ledger is just the story," Hollister said as he slid a document across the table. It was a formal demand letter. He explained that the estate was now treating those earlier advances as loans, with interest added, bringing the total to $741,000. He said they had 30 days to repay the full principal or agree to a structured settlement. After that window closed, the estate would move forward with a lawsuit, wage garnishment, frozen accounts, and every legal collection method available. Yelena shook her head. "You cannot do this," she said sharply. "It is already done," I replied. Hadwin tried again, pushing back, bringing up the cabin. She insisted that the cabin should go through intestate succession to the closest relatives. Hollister calmly informed her that the cabin had already been placed into a private trust back in 2009, with Junebug listed as the sole beneficiary. Legally speaking, the cabin had not been part of Silas's estate for 15 years. In other words, she had been trying to sell something that was never hers in the first place. That was the moment Roscoe broke down. It wasn't soft crying, it was the heavy kind, the kind that comes from a grown man realizing he has been fully seen and judged by the last person he ever expected. He looked at me, voice shaking, and said, "Uncle August, please, I've got a kid, I've got a mortgage. I can't raise that kind of money." I kept looking at him for a long time, without speaking. My mind went back to when he was a boy, coming to stay with us every summer for 2 weeks. I remembered the worn baseball glove he used to carry everywhere. I remembered Doreen, who cared for him like her own, giving away money she barely had because she believed in him completely. I also remembered my brother Silas quietly fixing Roscoe's messes in Greensboro, paying $85,000 once just to keep him out of court, never once asking for praise or repayment. I finally spoke. "Roscoe, my brother gave you a life he didn't have to give. He did it because he loved me, and he knew I loved you. And you threw it away. You stood at his grave and talked about numbers and property before the ground even settled over him. So no, you are going to pay what you owe. You are going to pay it with interest. And when you finish, whether it takes 15 years or 20, you will understand what it cost a man to love you. And maybe then you will know how to be worth that love." I stood up then. I picked up the ledger. Hollister gathered his papers. We walked out together, leaving them all sitting there. Hadwin was already on the phone, speaking fast and tense. Yelena stared blankly at the wall like she had stopped hearing anything at all. Roscoe stayed where he was, still crying, shoulders shaking. That night, I went home and sat on my back porch in the dark. I had a glass of iced tea instead of bourbon because I had decided to leave whiskey alone for a while. The cicadas were loud in the maple trees, filling the silence like an old memory that never leaves. I thought about Silas. I thought about Cordelia, a woman I had never even met. I thought about Junebug and how I would be seeing her again soon, this time bringing old photographs of her grandfather, of our father, of the cabin she had always had the right to belong to. I thought about the small boy she held in her arms, named Silas Augustus Wilkes, whose tiny sticky hand I had shaken at the bank, and who I hadn't stopped thinking about since. The money itself did not change me. It was never really about money. What mattered was realizing that my younger brother had spent 32 years quietly loving people, building lives, protecting secrets, and carrying burdens I never knew existed. He did it all while looking out for me in ways I never recognized at the time. He carried it alone because he believed the truth would hurt me. He was wrong about that part. The truth wouldn't have hurt me. I would have loved Cordelia. I would have loved Junebug. I would have loved that little boy as well. What hurt was knowing I lost 32 years I could have spent loving them too. So I made a decision. I am using whatever time I have left to make up for it. Now I drive down to Marlow Springs every second Tuesday of the month. I sit in the same booth in the same diner where Silas used to sit. I order the meatloaf because that's what he always ordered. I leave a generous tip every time because Cordelia once worked those floors, and I want that to mean something, even if only in my own way. After that, I drive to Junebug's house and sit on her porch. I read books aloud while her son does his homework. He is 6 now. He calls me Uncle Augie. He believes I have always been part of his life. I do not correct him. My niece, my nephew, and Yelena have not spoken to me since that day in the conference room. Roscoe still makes the payments every month. Late sometimes, reluctant, but he makes them. Hadwin filed for bankruptcy less than a year later and lost her professional certification. Yelena left Roscoe not long after that and moved to a small town outside Atlanta with a man whose name I have not cared enough to remember. I do not wish them harm. I do not wish them well either. I wish them what truth always brings, accountability, and a long road to face it. Silas left me one more thing inside that steel box. It was at the very bottom, under everything else, a plain white card. On it were 2 lines written in his rough handwriting. Augie, you were never the smart one. You were the good one. Be good a little longer for me. I keep that card in my wallet. I read it every morning before I get out of bed. And every second Tuesday, when I make that 90-mile drive to Marlow Springs, I read it twice. Once when I leave, and once when I return home. Because my brother spent 32 years driving that same road for someone he loved, and I figure I owe him at least that much. Henry Caldwell's story is not so different from mine. Money has a way of stripping masks off people who wear them too comfortably. Sometimes the quietest person in the family is carrying the heaviest burden, and sometimes the loudest voices at a funeral are the ones who never truly knew the person they are speaking about. If you have ever been underestimated, betrayed, or dismissed by your own family, then understand this: you do not have to collapse under it. Stand anyway. Walk forward anyway. The same people who tried to bury you are often the ones who unknowingly handed you the tools. Dignity is not something others hand you. It is something no one can take away once you choose to keep it. Looking back now, nearly 2 years after I drove home from Marlow Springs with that green ledger sitting on the passenger seat, I understand something more clearly. The lesson Silas left me was never really about money. It was about character, about who you become when nobody is watching, and who you remain when the truth finally steps into the light. My brother spent 32 years being a better man than most people ever noticed. He loved Cordelia privately because that was what she needed. He raised Junebug in the spaces between long drives and quiet returns because that is what real love sometimes looks like. He protected Hadwin and Roscoe not because they earned it, but because he thought the truth would hurt me more than their mistakes. Every choice he made cost him something. Every year carried its own loneliness, its own silence, its own sacrifices no one thanked him for. What he built over 3 decades was not just an inheritance of millions. It was something deeper, a way of living, a way of staying decent when there is no applause waiting. I've come to understand something simple but heavy. Life keeps a slow and steady accounting. Hadwin took small amounts and told herself it didn't matter. Roscoe cut corners and believed consequences could be avoided. Yelena built her life on half-truths. They all thought it would never catch up. But it always does. Not through punishment from above, but through the quiet math of consequences that eventually returns to every doorstep. What I want anyone listening, anyone who has been written off by their own family, to understand is this: you do not need to shout to be seen. You do not need to threaten to be respected. You do not need bitterness to survive what has been done to you. You only need to stay steady. Keep your record clean. Keep your dignity intact. Let time do what time has always done without needing permission from anyone. The people who underestimate you are often revealing more about themselves than they realize, and those who act like you are already gone are usually the first to disappear from anything that truly matters. Silas taught me, only after he was gone, that real strength is doing the right thing over and over again for years without recognition. Quiet consistency is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. Silence is not emptiness. That is the inheritance I am trying to pass on now to a 6-year-old boy named Silas Augustus Wilkes, and to anyone else who still needs to hear it.